I dislike Freud. I really do. This may seem like an odd way to start this week's video, but it's true and relevant. Freud had a really large impact on psychology and psychiatry, and while some of his ideas were okay, like defense mechanisms, denial, projection, etc., most of it was, frankly, junk. He didn't think very highly of women, although oddly he trained his daughter Anna Freud to be a psychoanalyst, and some of his ideas were downright damaging to women, and still are damaging to women. I cover this in one of the slides for this week, and it does come up later in the semester as well, but I want to mention it here because I feel so strongly about it. I study sexuality and romantic relationships, and so have come across plenty of times the ideas of different types of orgasms for women, and the idea that some types of orgasms are better than others. Many women feel inadequate if they can't orgasm just from penetration alone, and many men feel inadequate if they can't please their partner just from penetration. The idea that she might need extra help through clitoral stimulation, perhaps even through the use of a vibrator, is difficult for a lot of men and women to accept. But where do these ideas come from? Why should clitoral stimulation be somehow less than vaginal stimulation when it comes to an orgasm? Well, this is Freud's doing. As you'll learn, he suggested that young girls need to shift their focus from the clitoris, which was fine for masturbation when they were discovering their bodies, to their vagina, which is the only acceptable way to orgasm as a mature and presumably heterosexual married adult woman. But, of course, both boys and men could focus on their penis for sexual pleasure, so that was fine. And even though scientific research has shown that the clitoral structure actually extends and wraps around the vaginal canal, meaning that ultimately everything is a clitoral orgasm, and that there are no physiological differences in a woman's body in response to clitoral versus vaginal orgasm, though some women certainly report different sensations, this idea still persists. And it was just Freud's crazy ideas. It wasn't based on science or evidence or anything other than just his own sexist views about women. So that's why I dislike Freud. There are other theories that you need to know about in terms of how young children come to learn about gender, and there are issues with those theories too. No one theory fully explains every aspect of gender development, but at least they're based on careful observations of how children learn about other things and how they come to understand gender. They're at least scientific, which is more than we can say for Freud and his unfortunately persisting ideas about women as being inferior. Penis envy? Seriously? Week 5, Chapter 4. This week we're talking biology, largely. Most of the rest of the class is largely about how gender is influenced by and expressed in society and the environment, but there are some biological differences between males and females. No big surprise. But there are some really interesting ways that biology can get things wrong when it comes to sex. For example, did you know that it's possible for someone to be born looking like a female with female genitalia, but then enter puberty and suddenly the genitalia and body become masculinized from testosterone, and the person ultimately ends up looking like a male and identifying as a male? That's a pretty intense switch, and it's all due to biology. It's not transgender, it's intersex. There's a great video this week to watch that tells the story of many intersex individuals. Perhaps it's never even occurred to you before that a baby could be born without being clearly a male or a female, but that's the sexual dimorphism fairy tale, that this idea that there are only two forms of humans, male and female, and there's never any deviation from that. It's not true. There are many forms that fall somewhere in the middle between 100% biologically male and 100% biologically female. Sometimes someone is intersex because something went wrong with hormones. Maybe the person's body in utero didn't respond to masculinizing androgens, so even though the person is XY and has internal male genitalia, their body looks female. Hormones are very powerful and very important. And when we're talking about gender, we often think about the main hormone for males, which is testosterone, and the main hormone for females, which is estrogen. But as you'll learn, everyone has both of these hormones. It's just that males typically have more testosterone than females, and females typically have more estrogen than males. But because we, as a society, like to think about specific hormones as being male or female, it becomes tempting to use those hormones to explain behaviors that we think are related to gender. Oh, those boys are being really aggressive. Well, that's just all the testosterone. Or, oh, she's super emotional right now because she's getting her period. Must be all those crazy female hormones. But how much of this is actually supported by science? What role do hormones really play in aggression and PMS? The explanations are certainly not going to be as straightforward as you'd probably like. I can say that much. Week 6, Chapter 6. How did you know what your gender was? When did you really know you were a boy or a girl? Do you remember? And did you ever feel like things didn't match up, like your body was wrong, that it should be the other gender? This certainly isn't very common, feeling confused about your gender identity, though we're certainly becoming more aware of transgender issues as society in general has become somewhat more tolerant of these types of differences. And you'll watch several videos about transgender individuals to hear their stories and to learn more about their struggles and experiences. But the material that will most likely be relevant for you in this chapter is differential gender socialization. And this is what you should write your journal on, unless of course you actually have experienced gender identity concerns. Basically, what we'll be covering first is all about how boys and girls are treated differently from birth. Yes, and even from before birth sometimes if the parents find out the sex of the baby. Do you buy blue or pink sheets for the baby's room? Do you buy blue or pink newborn clothes? Do you imagine playing with trucks and blocks with your child when they grow up? Or do you imagine princess tea parties and painted nails? The sex of a child changes how people interact with them based on personal ideas about what's appropriate and good for boys versus girls. It's almost impossible to avoid exposing a child to ideas about gender roles and stereotypes because almost all of children's stuff is highly gendered. Luckily, the colors yellow and green are apparently neutral, so very young children's clothing can be neutral with things like ducks or caterpillars. But once they're out of the newborn stage, there's a boys section for clothes and a girls section for clothes. And there's a boys section for toys and a girls section for toys. And yes, there are neutral toys, but almost all of Toys R Us and other similar stores are either blue or pink. So when you're working through this chapter, I really want you to think about your own experiences. But if possible, talk to your parents about this. Ask them how they felt when they found out your gender. What did they think about buying you clothes or toys that were highly gendered? Did they get pressure from their own parents, your grandparents, to raise you in a certain way that was appropriate for your gender? Grandparents always have a lot of advice. See if they have any stories about you wanting to play with toys that were for the other gender. What happened? How did they feel about it? You've probably never explicitly had a conversation with your parents about the choices they made with regards to your gender. What toys you got for your birthday or for Christmas, what Halloween costumes you were allowed to wear, what clothes you could wear, what sports or activities you could join. But I'm sure you'll find it interesting, and it might help you better understand a lot of your own ideas about gender. After all, we learn a lot about gender roles and stereotypes from our parents and friends. Week 8, Chapter 12. What do you want to do with the rest of your life? That's a pretty broad question, right? But think about it. How do you answer that question? And how you answer it may have